Welcome to the Explainer. Right, today we are digging into one of the absolute most stunning, jaw-dropping narratives of the recent tournament. We're talking about the shocking exit of a heavily favored Portugal squad, and on the flip side, the incredibly clinical progression of Spain. We're going to look way past the flashy headlines today and figure out exactly what happened on that pitch, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this right here is the central mystery we're unpacking today. Think about it. How does a team literally stacked with Champions League winners, a true golden generation, boasting some of the best talent in world football, manage to look so entirely unconvincing and then ultimately crash out? Was it just a string of bad luck, or are we looking at a fundamental structural collapse? So here's our roadmap for the breakdown. We're going to start with the fall of Portugal, then look closely at Ronaldo's fading impact, the resulting midfield domino effect, Martinez's passive tactics, Spain's killer blow, and finally, what comes next.
Section 1. The Fall of Portugal. A Golden Generation Stumbles.
Coming into this tournament, the expectations for Portugal's world-class roster were absolutely massive. They were heavily backed by so many to go all the way and lift the trophy. But just listen to this piece of analysis that pretty much sums it up. I'm actually stunned at how poor a tournament that they've had. We expected so much more. It perfectly captures the sheer disappointment fans and analysts felt watching them. They were struggling to assert any real dominance against teams like DR Congo and Colombia, and they barely scraped past Croatia on fleeting moments rather than actual merit. They just never truly convinced us that they were a cohesive unit capable of winning it all.
Moving to Section 2. Ronaldo's fading impact. The 41-year-old target man. Now, what's really interesting about this data is the sheer drop-off. Look, Cristiano Ronaldo is undeniably one of the absolute greatest players of all time. His legacy is fully cemented, no debate there. But at 41 years old, a single player simply cannot carry a team of this magnitude alone anymore. Look at these numbers for his touches in the opposition area. 10 touches against Uzbekistan, which drops down to just 2 against Colombia. Then a single touch against Croatia, and only 3 against Spain. It objectively proves how incredibly isolated and uninvolved he became as the tournament went on. The high-intensity movement required to stretch modern defenses, match after grueling match, it just isn't there anymore. Because at the end of the day, time spares absolutely no one. When your main striker loses that explosive pace to run in behind the defensive line, it doesn't just affect his own goal tally, right? It inevitably reshapes the entire team's strategy around him. You essentially end up playing with a static target man, which drastically limits your tactical options. And honestly, that leads us perfectly into the next major issue they faced. Section 3. The midfield domino effect. World-class creators neutralized.
You see, the true tragedy of Portugal's tournament wasn't just Ronaldo's isolation up top. It was the massive knock-on effect it had on their world-class midfield. Let's contrast how these guys normally operate. At the club level, elite creators like Vitinha at PSG or Bruno Fernandes at Manchester United thrive on dynamic forwards making fast runs in behind the defense. They're used to playing these quick, highly vertical passes. But for the national team, because their striker constantly comes short and literally cannot run in behind, these incredible creators are forced into slow, sideways passing. Their forward movement is entirely restricted. We call this the tactical domino effect. It's like a chain reaction. Think about it from the perspective of the opposing center backs. If you aren't terrified of a striker's pace getting in behind you, what do? Well, you squeeze the game. You push your defensive line high up the pitch, compressing the midfield completely and giving players like Vitinha absolutely no space to operate. So they're forced to take too many touches and play it safe, mostly backwards or sideways. The whole attacking framework just totally collapses. Which brings us to Section 4, Martinez's passive tactics, refusal to adapt. The structural issues were glaringly obvious to anyone watching, which leads us to a pretty critical question. Why didn't the manager change it? One post-match analysis put it bluntly, saying he made a decision, Roberto Martinez, for the individual, not for the betterment of the team. Critics heavily pointed out that Martinez treated this incredibly crucial knockout game almost like a testimonial match to please his star player, rather than showing a ruthless pursuit of actually advancing in the tournament. 0. That is the number of minutes Gonçalo Ramos played against Spain. Let that sink in for a second. Ramos, this dynamic forward who just moved to Milan for big money, the player who literally scored the game-winning goal in the previous round against Croatia, spent the entire 90 minutes against Spain sitting on the bench. Martinez made 5 substitutions, and not a single one of them involved swapping his 41-year-old striker for a fresh, in-form goal scorer when the team desperately needed a spark. A really clear picture of managerial flaws emerges here, doesn't it?
It's this overly pragmatic, defense-first mindset that prioritizes playing it safe over being brave. It's a total unwillingness to substitute a struggling superstar. He was bizarrely hoarding substitutions for an extra time that, well, never came, and totally ignoring informed players like Ramos who could have changed the game. It was a completely reactive, fear-based approach, and it ultimately doomed them. Section 5. Spain goes for the kill, the 90-plus first-minute dagger.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because while Portugal was paralyzed by indecision, Spain showed exactly why they are a likely finalist. At minute 45, it's a tight 50-50 game. Honestly, Spain actually looks a bit vulnerable here. This was the window. This was the exact moment Portugal should have recognized the opportunity and really attacked. But instead, jump forward to minute 85, and Portugal is playing incredibly passively, super narrow, just settling for safe sideways passes. Then, minute 90+1, the dagger. Portugal missed their window of opportunity entirely, while Spain just waited patiently for theirs.
Let's walk through the exact tactical sequence of that winning goal, because it perfectly shows what happens when you don't press your advantage. Eventually, your defense will just switch off. Step 1. Fabian Ruiz plays what looks like a completely harmless, deceptive sideways pass. Step 2. Portugal's defense completely switches off, just for a split second, allowing Ferran Torres to exploit the suddenly wide-open right half space. And finally, Step 3. Mikel Merino receives it and delivers a devastating, absolutely flawless finish. Game over.
It really comes down to this fundamental difference in mentality. Portugal played a calculator-like game of caution, acting way more like a computer trying desperately not to make an error, rather than a football team trying to win a knockout match. Spain, however, identified that one single moment of human weakness, that split-second defensive switch-off, and went straight for the kill. That ruthless mentality in the final third when it mattered most, that is exactly why they secured their spot to advance.
Section 6. What next for Portugal? A clean slate.
So, looking ahead, both the Roberto Martinez era and Cristiano Ronaldo's international career seem to be coming to a close, leaving Portugal staring down a massive, massive transitional period. Take the number 45. That's how many matches Martinez managed for the national team. And sure, his win rate might look totally fine on a spreadsheet when you're padding stats against much weaker teams in qualifiers, right? But in tournament football, the inability to adapt and win the biggest games when the pressure is absolutely at its highest, that is what truly defines a manager's tenure. So the crucial point is this: the path forward needs to be decisive. First off, they have to embrace a new, modernized tactical manager who simply isn't afraid to make big, tough decisions. Second, they need to finally unleash the incredible potential of that midfield. Let world-class players like Vitinha, Bruno Fernandes, and Nuno Mendes actually run free. And finally, they have to shift the immense cultural weight off a single player's shoulders. You respect the incredible legacy of the past, absolutely, for sure you do, but you literally have to rebuild the system for the modern game. Which leaves us with this final lingering thought. We've seen firsthand how tactical rigidity and the sheer gravity of a superstar can weigh down an incredibly talented squad. The talent is undeniably there is no question about it. So the real question now is, will a clean slate finally allow Portugal's golden generation to step out of the shadows, play without restriction, and actually reach their true potential on the world stage? Well, that's going to be fascinating to watch. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.